is he? Now, we know that in the first Sunday of the year this year, the New York Times actually included a separate 16-page section on talking about death with each other. And the section covered everything from funeral arrangements to palliative care to the afterlife. Professor Tom Long has noted that every time he preaches a funeral, he feels as if there are two preachers vying for the congregation's attention: death and the pastor. Death preaches inside people's minds and hearts, trying to capture everyone's attention. And death's message is, life is over when you die, so you only live once. Make all the money you can, give it away before you die. Once it's over, it's over. And to the grieving, death treats God as a bandit and claims that God robbed us of our departed. Death whispers, life will never be the same without your loved one. Their death will leave you unfilled and void forever. But the pastor's message and Jesus' message are always different. Life is a gift, and it is so every day. God gives us today, so life is continuously lived. God receives people into a new, eternal life. He doesn't snatch them away like a thief. Every time we gather to think about death, we're really asking, where is God's presence in this place and in our loved one? How can I see God working in my life right now? How can Jesus show us that even in the face of the end, life begins again? And the story of Jesus' resuscitation of Lazarus tells us how. It is perhaps the pivotal, controversial scene in the gospel. And from this moment on, the Pharisees and those religious leaders they basically have a big plot to make sure that Jesus is killed. So to understand this sign, the seventh of seven in the book of John, we need to recall ancient history about funerals. The Jewish system of mourning, weeping, and wailing was familiar to the ancient world. Paid mourners, functioned as the modern day equivalent of, an expensive funeral. The pomp, the circumstances of people coming and going would be longer than a visitation in the South or a funeral wake in the Midwest. Mourning demonstrated how wealthy you were and how much you were loved. And the family washed and prepared the body. They assumed the soul lingered, hovering over the grave of the loved one for about, 3 days or so. And they lived much as writer Flannery O'Connor wrote of life in the South. Quotes, "The world was made for the dead. Think of all the dead people there are. There's 1,000,000 times more dead than living. And the dead are dead 1,000,000 times longer than the living are alive." And Jesus waits until the public display of mourning is complete. He's not there for a performance. He's not there to deliver pious platitudes that God will just work everything out. Death hurts. It's painful. And even the Son of God doesn't arrive in time to prevent Lazarus from dying. Jesus wants to demonstrate the power of presence in grief. No matter when we arrive, our presence is always right on time. And Martha, she greets Jesus before he actually arrives in Bethany. And Martha is angry. Martha is angry and lets it tell in her voice as what she approaches Jesus. "You had been here, my brother would not have died." And Mary, on the other hand, she's so sad she can't even get up to greet Jesus. And when Martha greets Jesus, Jesus offers a view of death that most religious leaders of his day rejected, but was rooted actually in the Hebrew scriptures. Ezekiel prophesied, "I will open your graves and have you rise from them." And Jesus announced that this death-conquering life is available to us in this life, even before we die. As Paul said, "The one who raised Christ from the dead will give you life in your mortal bodies." The spirit of dwelling in us is there. The Spirit is indwelling in us. And Jesus doesn't want to wait until the death for Martha, Mary, and Lazarus to experience this perspective. As the times illustrated, we spend a lot of time preparing for death. We plan our estate. We plan for retirement. We have a planning for estate planning and planning for our plots. That little piece of real estate that we own in a cemetery or a little cubicle in a columbarium. And most importantly, we need a plan for living after it is over, something that few actually ever discuss. We are needed after the funeral as much as during it. And Jesus says it starts right now by how we live and how we face death. Lent and death kind of go hand in hand. Ash Wednesday confronted us with our own mortality. From dust you are made and dust you shall return. Lent also reminds us of the ways sin has tried to kill us and suck the life out of us. But another death triumphs over all of that. Jesus' death on the cross swallows up the pain of this life and the punishment of sin and gives way to a new life. We can be the people who help others face death and with Jesus. So what is your plan this season? How can you help someone live in the face of death? The cemetery is a picture of our mission. We often see at a cemetery 2 doors. One is the doorway into eternal life, and the other an exit back door to resume life without the loved one who has died. And for the person whose loved one is experiencing their first Easter in heaven, it's difficult. And for the family that grieves the loss of a child, Lent is a time to refocus our efforts by standing at the door with grieving people. Death reminds us that there is no moving on from death, but we can move through our grief with Jesus into a new, more abundant life. There is no better place to start than at a cemetery. What do Christians do? Well, they show up, remember, and they give time to share the story about the one who has died. They let somebody do the talking and the sharing. They are good listeners. They listen to the stories about the person who has died. And I don't know, for people outside of the church who don't walk a walk with God, I don't know how their moving goes forward. Death hangs on and hovers, like a soul over the grave of a loved one. And so being on time is not where Christians are needed most. In fact, the believer's best use of time is not where Christians are needed most. In fact, the believer's best use of time comes when you're late to the funeral. If you want to meet with people, go back to the cemetery 3 to 4 hours later, before sunset. You'll find loved ones laying flowers when they're all alone. And what do? Well, you probably cry with them. You weep with them. You let your emotions get the best of you. You blubber all over yourself, or you sit in silence. When the time is right, you will invite that grieving person to talk to you about their loved one. You listen and you lean in and you learn about someone else's life. You show them that their lives really did matter. So today, if you've come to worship, Jesus knows where you've laid your loved one, and he walks with you through your grief. And there might be someone you need to ask the same and invite this season, just to talk about their loved one. It just takes a little bit of time, and it just opens up the heart, and your heart too. For indeed, doing this and being a good listener is indeed a path to resurrection life. And the church says,